Guys, I hope you're all well. So today we're going to be talking about my most asked question probably ever, which is how do I afford to travel so much? I've kind of avoided this question in the past because it's quite a tricky one for me to answer, because travelling is a different thing to everyone, and I feel like that makes the question a lot more difficult, because I didn't just want to answer this and be like, oh, I saved up this much and I went to this place and I booked this flight through this company. I wanted to be able to film this video and tell you how I afforded to travel, while also giving you some advice and tips on things that I found really handy, or things that I've been told about that I'm going to be using in the future, that kind of thing. So as a bit of a backstory, my boyfriend and I have been travelling together for 6 months. We started in South Africa for 3 months, then I did Spain, he went straight to Croatia, and I met him out in Croatia for 8 weeks, and now we're going on to Spain again. So I went to Malaga before, and this time I'm going to Barcelona. So as you've probably noticed, our plan is not to travel fast. So the whole point of it is that every place we go, we experience as much as possible. We can explore the country to the full extent. So when we went to South Africa, we did a full trip of the coast. So we went from Johannesburg all the way down to Cape Town and back up again. Croatia was slightly different, but I'll get onto that later in the video. But essentially, we just book one-way tickets and stay there until we feel like we really want to go home, or we want to try somewhere new, or we just feel like we've explored the country as much as we can in that trip. We basically just want to let fate help us, let our hearts decide where we go next, and leave everything down to just kind of being open, so that we don't feel like we're forced into another place or like we're rushed to see anywhere. We want to kind of just know that that's the amount of time that we should have spent there, kind of thing. It sounds really like mystical and hippie-like, but we just essentially want to explore as much as possible, and that's kind of our way of travelling. So we could be going for another year, another 2 years, 6 years, 10 years, or we could be going for another 2 weeks and then decide that actually we don't want to travel much more. So anyway, I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty bit and tell you all about things that I've picked up, how I actually afforded to travel in the first place, and just tips and stuff along the way. The first thing I'm going to mention is saving money, because I feel like that's just like hand in hand with travelling, is the fact that you need to save money, because otherwise you can't actually afford to do anything. Travelling is not free, and no matter how cheap you do it, no matter how much you budget, it's not free. It does amount up, especially if you are travelling long term. I don't really know how to explain what I'm trying to say here, but you kind of need to listen to other people, but also not listen to other people. So obviously you need to save money, but the amount that you save is kind of up to you. I took advice from quite a few other people who had saved various amounts of money for various lengths of trip in different countries and stuff, kind of just gauging for 3 months how much I'd need. But South Africa is a fairly cheap country to go to, so I kind of was taking other people's advice from Australia and stuff, and just like working out budget wise to what it would be in South Africa. But everyone spends different amounts of money, so it's quite difficult to sit here and say you need to save this amount or this amount, so I'm not going to be doing that. So my blog and YouTube slash the entirety of CopperGarden is my job. This is what I do for a living. This is how I make my money. It's the only way I make my money, and I pumped about 24 hours a day into CopperGarden, and then he was also working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week in a bar, so that we could have obviously more money. Essentially, we both just worked as much as we could and saved as much as we could individually, and then we put it all into one pot. So obviously staying in hotels and stuff and flights and things like that, we were spending kind of like as one, so we just put all the money together because it was easier than getting to places, splitting bills, working out change, all that kind of stuff. And obviously we're in a relationship, so it wasn't really an issue to be like almost sharing money. It kind of goes without saying that we were both zombies for a while. We didn't really have social lives. If we did, it would be that we just sat at a friend's house and ate as cheap as possible, or if we were drinking, we'd buy a cheap bottle of wine. It wasn't like we had the most social life ever in those few months, but to us the priority was getting out the country, travelling, seeing the world, doing cool stuff. Like every time, for example, I'd go to Zara and look at a £30 top that I really liked, my first thought would be, okay, what can that £30 be spent on elsewhere? So I knew that I could spend that £30 on one night of accommodation for us, or I could pay for my food for a week. Like, you kind of just have to think about things in a different way and know that what you're thinking of spending money on might not necessarily be a priority to spend money on. And once you start thinking like that, it's actually kind of easy to just save money, and you kind of get out of the habit of spending money a lot. So for example, I'd get out of the habit of buying Starbucks at the train station every time I go, and I'd get out of the habit of like all these different things that I'd got myself into, like little like £3 here and £7 there, that all mounted up to quite a lot of money over time. And it's amazing how much you save when you actually do cut out things like Starbucks every day. So moving on from saving, the next thing I wanted to talk about is flights, because flights are pretty much the most essential second to saving, because you need to get to the country. But flights are expensive is the gist of it. They are bloody expensive and they cost a lot of money. I think my number one thing to tell you about flights is to keep your schedule fairly open. So essentially with that I mean if you are planning to go travelling in February, for example, like we were, we kind of roughly picked a date. I think it was the 20th, I can't remember. And we just kind of plucked that date out of thin air, and then what we did was look on Skyscanner, and it gives you like a whole month plan. So you can see every day in the month and you can see the cheapest flights on all of those days, and you can change it to like direct and stuff. But it basically helps you to be able to pick the cheapest flight. So rather than being like, oh, we'll 100% have to go on the 20th, we kind of allowed ourselves a bit of leeway, and we ended up going on the 16th because it was cheaper. So kind of standard procedure, the midweek is cheaper. So it's definitely worth thinking about keeping your schedule open just to save you some extra money. Another tip is to clear your browser cookies, because websites like Skyscanner and a lot of other flight websites do keep your cookies. So if you're looking at the same flights all the time and they know you're looking at those flights, they do up the price by quite a bit. So it's worth just clearing your cookies every time you look, so that every time you look you're getting the low deals and not the ones that they're adding up, because they know that you really want them. So next thing I'm going to talk about is accommodation. Accommodation for me was quite a tricky one, because obviously having the blog and having Instagram, I felt the need to almost keep up an appearance at first, and I wanted to book all the luxurious places and the ones that were like really cool treetops and that kind of thing. But being realistic, the places that you see on Instagram are more than likely in like Bali and stuff, which is really cheap, and you can't really afford it long term. They're things that you can kind of afford for one night a week, and that's when you take all the pictures and then you stay in like little hostels. I actually favour staying in hostels and Airbnbs, because Airbnb for one is really great. You get all the space that you want if you get an entire property. Sometimes they're like little studio flats and stuff, but it's nice to be able to cook your own food, have the bed, have the sofa, just chill out and have your own space, because hotels and stuff you don't really get that, and having your own space to cook in is essential sometimes, because it just saves you so much more money being able to cook there and then, rather than having to go out all the time for food. And you'd be quite amazed how the price of accommodation tots up. So even spending £40 a night, that's £280 a week, which over time, if you're traveling for 3 months, is a lot of money on accommodation that you could be kind of saving elsewhere. We actually stayed for, I'd say, most of our trip in South Africa. We stayed with Adrian's family or friends, because it just seemed to be the easiest way to do things, and staying with other people keeps the accommodation cost down by quite a bit. If we hadn't have had that luxury of being able to do that, then I think we probably would have spent a lot more. But we did kind of stay in like hostels and stuff around, staying at other people's houses. Like we stayed on his brother's sofa for a good, I'd say like 3 weeks. Wasn't actually that uncomfortable, it was quite nice, but obviously being able to stay at someone's house in other countries isn't always something that you can do, because if you don't know anyone there, then obviously that's completely ruled out. So the next point I wanted to mention is that I do work on the go. So you've got to remember that everywhere that I'm going, I take CopperGarden with me. So my Instagram is still being updated, my blog, my YouTube, everything I have is still being updated. I still get collaborations, I'm still getting things like affiliate links are still being used, that kind of stuff. So it is still making me money on the go, but working as you're traveling is actually probably the best thing you could do. I know a lot of people kind of stigmatize the fact that traveling should be like a giant holiday, but realistically, if you want to keep going and have money, working is normally a good option to have. I know that when we go to Australia and stuff, we're going to be probably working on the go as well. Even if it just pays for our accommodation every night, it just means that we're still keeping some money and saving some money. But where I'm going with this is Croatia, where we've just been. We both worked for a flotilla company, so we're really lucky in the fact that Adrian has what you call a yacht master, which means he's completely qualified to sail boats. That comes in so handy, I can't tell you, because he can basically work anywhere in the world that he wants to, and it's quite a good paid job. I'm actually thinking of getting my STCW, which means that I can go and work on boats and do things like waitressing or hostessing and all the kind of things that don't require me to actually sail a boat, because I don't think I'd be any good at it, but it means I can work on a boat as well, so we can keep traveling together. So obviously by having Adrian able to sail, it meant that working for this flotilla company was relatively handy, because it meant that we were still traveling but we were working. So even though we were working 24 hours a day, it meant that we were still seeing new places, we were still in the sunshine, still in the sea, still on the beach. And by working on a boat specifically, I know that other places do also do this, but it meant that we had our accommodation and our breakfast and lunch every day, and most of the time, because we were with the company, we got dinners paid for as well. So it's kind of a handy thing to do, because then we were literally traveling almost for free and getting paid for it. In the future, we're definitely going to do similar again, because it just kind of makes sense to do that. And obviously the more that you can make while you're traveling, the more that your pot is just like growing rather than shrinking, and it just means you can go for longer. But the one thing I really did want to stress in this video is that the reason I can afford to travel so much is because I am still working. Like, I do still do my blog really regularly, even though when I'm actually traveling, previously it's not been updated as regularly. From now on I'm going to make sure that it is, because it just, like, I do it for the love of doing it, not because I get paid for doing it. And I think it's quite handy to have something like a blog where I can work wherever in the world, because it just means that wherever I am I've still got a source of income. But obviously even if it wasn't making me money I still would be doing it. And the last point I wanted to stress in this video is that the reason I can afford to travel is because I really want to travel. If you want something bad enough, you will do absolutely anything to make it happen. I completely know that there are people out there who, for whatever reason, can't, like you've got babies or you've got a mortgage you can't leave behind. If you wanted to travel, you'll find a way. So even if, like, I remember back before me and Adrian were moving together, so this was way back last year, and I was sat down with my friend Tash, who is at Tash Mackay, used to be at Simply Beauty, and I said to her that obviously we both worked, even if we went on Friday evenings and we came back on Sunday evenings just to travel and do city breaks and stuff, and then have like one big holiday for 3 weeks a year, that would be amazing. Like, I would literally spend my entire month's wages just on those holidays, because I just really want to see the world, and I want to explore, and I want to feel cultured, and I want to do all this stuff that makes me feel like, I don't know the word for it, like, essentially I'm just stressing that if you want something bad enough, you'll make it happen. Yeah, I guess that's kind of all I'm trying to say. There is a blog post linked in my bio which has a bit more information, because I wrote that before I filmed this video, and it's got a bit more detail on everything, and it's got a few more kind of things that you may want to know. But yeah, I hope you like this video. Don't really know how to bring it to a natural end because I've never done anything like this before, but yeah, I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you found it useful in some way. If there is anything that you wanted to ask me, feel free to ask away in the comments. I'm really open to talk about the amount of money we saved, or even just silly things like where we stayed in South Africa or where I'm planning on going next. Pretty much any question you have, I'm willing to answer within reason, about travel only. Bye guys.